Back in the day, in the 70s, the Book of Lists, and there are 3 volumes, and they are all kinds of lists. Left-handed presidents, famous bank robberies.
God, I feel like I know what you're talking about.
It's on so the next time you come to my house, I have all 3 volumes.
It's going to inspire me. I'm going to make more lists. What should be my next list?
So when did you start making lists?
Probably when
As a kid?
No, it was probably when I made my bucket list.
Oh.
But I make lists like randomly. The Marvel one, because I'm like, if we're watching the Marvel movies, right? Like, now what? Well, now we got to rank all of them. You know, it's just like something that I do.
So it's a ranking for you. It's your...
Well,
like,
and
is there like this need to sort and I'm super fascinated.
You're digging for the skill.
Okay, wait.
I'm digging for the skill.
I have
the
another
why.
list.
I'm digging for the why.
I have another list. So on your Google Maps, you can basically put like restaurants that you've visited or whatever. So you can map out anything, and I don't remember what they're called. I have it on my phone. But I put every single restaurant in Chicago that I like. So that when people come to Chicago, they're like, "Oh, do you have like restaurant recommendations?" And I'm like, "Yes, I do." And I can send them the list of restaurants that I like.
So your list,
Yeah, it benefits other people.
if they happen to ask for it.
Right. Which
So I kind of
last night, we were talking about Star Wars and Marvel. My list came in handy.
Your list did come in handy. It's just like you make these lists for your own,
for myself,
for yourself, for your own pleasure.
just in case someone.
But then in
asks
case
about
someone asks, like I
Yeah.
kind of think about that in terms of, right, so I'm a collector
Yes.
/ hoarder, but things that I save, you know, usually when people save things, it's just in case someone might ask me for this. So she hoards her lists.
Yeah, I mean, the hardest thing for me about lists, the thing that tires me is actually picking the rankings. Because if you said, hey,
Yeah.
pick your favorite movie, like to me, that's an exhausting question.
Yeah.
Like, I have a hard time actually designating like what comes first or what comes
It's
second.
hard, but I mean, in
So
terms
much
of the Marvel
ridiculous.
movies, we can all admit that Thor was the worst one. So in that case,
Can we though?
I don't know. I hope so.
According to your list.
I hope we can, because it's not good.
Do you rank other things like your favorite relatives?
No. No.
Cheryl, where are we? What did we just do?
We went on a random meandering about Adriana's list that I'm still trying to, like, I'm fascinated by it and I want to figure out what that means, because list making in and of itself is a super powerful thing. I think as human beings, we just normally sort and sift and separate. And physically where we are, we're in Nashville, Tennessee State University.
Yeah.
And then she gives us a sound effect. And it's a place that holds a really special place in my heart. Got a lot of family here. My mom went to my mother, her sister, my aunt, and my uncle, my aunt's husband, all went to college here. So it was, when we walked in the door, there's a bench in front of Elliott Hall, which was my mom's dorm when she went here, she and her sister. And I had this incredible emotional moment. Like, my mother walked here. My mother was in this building. Years and years of my mother telling me it took coming to college for her to learn who she was. And coming to college and being surrounded by the faculty and the students just validated she wanted to be a scientist. And she talked about telling other people that she wanted to be a scientist. And so this was the 50s. And they were like, no, be a teacher. You can be a teacher. Do that. And no one understood her love of science and nature. And she was a biology major and ultimately became a research scientist, a microbiologist that specialized in infectious diseases. And there are about 1 million reasons why I want my mom to kind of be in the world right now. But having just lived through a pandemic, I would be fascinated to hear what she had to say about this moment in time.
Yeah, I mean, it is sort of a goosebumps feeling to think like we're in the building recording And there's no way she could have ever imagined, I'm going to have a daughter that's going to be doing a podcast. Because, what's a podcast?
What's podcast? Although she would have equated it to, I remember her stories growing up. She always said that as a scientist that she was not allotted, that was the word that she used, she was not allotted a vivid imagination because she dealt in the real. And I can never tell if that was a slam or not, but her world, she didn't grow up with television. She grew up with radio. She grew up listening to the Lone Ranger and any number of these serialized radio shows. And then my dad said to her at one point, he said, no, we had to have good imaginations because we were listening to, these radio shows, these programs, and you would only get so much information through the audio, through the sound, and the rest was left to your imagination to help you interpret the story. And so I always loved listening to her stories about the radio because as a family, they would sit around. And actually, in my grandparents' house, I remember seeing that radio. It was this massive thing. It looked more like a cabinet than what we think of as a radio. And the family would sit around and listen to drama. And so they were in little town in Kentucky, Murray, Kentucky. And so they would listen to Grand Ole Opry. And it was all, I'm like, but what did you look at? And my mom said we would look at one another. And so watching each other's faces as whatever they were listening to surprised them or delighted them or haunted them or made them sad. And I wonder now if we are as observant because our world connects us with, so many of our senses instead of just engaging one or two senses. But with your question about could she have imagined me in this place? I know she imagined wanting me to go to school here. But I don't think, and I am fortunate that she lived to see me become CEO of IIDA, but this whole other tangent that I've taken with so many speaking engagements and writing and podcasting, that was not in the realm of the life that she and I lived together. So this is this weird kind of sense of playing with time for me, because I also did not know who she was when she was between the ages of 18 and 21. I don't know who that person was. I only know the person that was my mother, the person that she became.
And she lived here in this building.
In this building.
Which we did not plan.
No.
We had no idea that we were going to be in Elliott Hall, and that is where your family's memorial is.
Yeah, she and her sister, when this was a dorm, lived here. And then also, so this memorial bench is in front of Elliott Hall. It's also where my uncle proposed to my aunt. And so, right, chills. And just thinking of them, I've looked at my mom's old yearbooks. And so I have these photos of her, but she's very one-dimensional, right? It's almost like she's this character that I've heard about. And when you think about it, how well do we really know our parents? We know them as our parents. There's so much.
When they were younger, who were they?
Yeah.
Would I be friends with them?
I love that question.
Great question.
Yeah. Would you be friends with the young person that was your parent?
I hope so.
Wow. This is a chance, I guess, for us to unpack a little about the skill set, right?
Yeah.
Season one in the books.
Yes.
It's over. That's it. How do you feel?
So at first I had all of this trepidation and fear, and, I wasn't always sure who the guests were going to be, and how am I going to know the right questions? Am I going to strike the right chord? And
are they going to be talkative?
Are they going to be talkative? Yeah. Are they going to, and how do I draw them out? And always trying to attempting to identify the skill set. And so I still go back to, I think when Doug and I were first talking about this, I am still fascinated by who people are and why they do what they do. And do they do those things because they've been trained, educated, taught to do those things? Do they do those things because they love to do those things? Or are there things built into us, hardwired into us? in our DNA that allow us to be so good at certain things? And then do we uncover things as we go through life? You know, you think about the person who was an astronaut and then they become a realtor. That's not a real person, but I bet that's somebody out there, right? I just made that up. But, you know, how do we end up in this thing that we call a career?
I mean, is your fascination in this, is it rooted in you wondering that about yourself, or is it rooted in something different?
Yeah. I mean, a question that I loved and dreaded equally when I was a kid was when someone would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Right.
And I could think of 1,000 things, and then that would terrify me because, I have to narrow this down and I have to figure it out. And then it became, right, then what leads you down a path toward a career? And as we saw in the skill set, sometimes it's passion. Sometimes it is you are predisposed to something. I think about Dr. Langer, whose father was a doctor and his grandfather was a doctor, and he felt compelled to be a doctor. I think I remember him saying he had a toy stethoscope at the age of 3. And so if his father had not been a doctor or his grandfather had not been a doctor, would he have been a doctor? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right? And, you know, I think about Steph, the tattoo artist who started life as a graphic designer, and that winding into adorning the body with art. Yeah. It sounds like it makes sense, but I bet at some point in her life it didn't, or to someone else it may not have made sense. And so I think by this gradual, intentional unveiling, revealing, it's been fascinating for me, but I'm also in hearing from the guests, it's also been fascinating for them. Because what I keep hearing back from guests when they follow up is no one ever asked me a question like that, and I never thought about how that made sense in my life and my career.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, we were just having lunch, 20 minutes ago, and there was a TSU student that asked us. Her name was Regina. She's a senior here, and she's not studying interior design, and so she was like, I just don't know what I'm doing, like what should I be majoring in, like
she's majoring in psychology.
She's majoring in psychology. And so do you think that, we were talking about this, is it a path, like everyone has a different path, and what would you say to students that don't know, like, what is my purpose, what is my goal? Because on the podcast, so many of our guests felt like for very young they knew what they wanted to do. So what about the people that don't know what they want to do?
I think it's okay to not know, and your purpose doesn't have to be the job that you do. That your purpose may not necessarily be what you get paid on the 15th and the 30th of each month. Your purpose may be something entirely different. Your purpose may be to be a mentor, or to guide in some way, or to bring, or your purpose could be to be a catalyst. You're conducting some kind of amazing energy into whatever organization you work in, and it might not have anything to do with your job. I think, and maybe it's a very American thing because, right, we live in a capitalist society. I think we get obsessed around the job.
Yeah.
And sometimes lose sight of our purpose, which can be outside of. Now, certainly we can find our purpose within the job, but I think sometimes trying to figure out your job is different than figuring out your work.
Yeah.
There was a quote you had about halfway into season 1. You said, you and your skill set walk into a bar, which one is somebody going to buy a drink for? And it's almost like your skill set and your purpose.
Yeah.
Walk into a bar. Like there's this other layer. I just think that quote, that moment always stuck out to me.
Yeah. Well, and I think with JD Netto, we talked about with him, I think it was a similar conversation, but leading into you lead with your skill set. Your skill set walks in first, and that's what people notice. And sometimes people know what we're good at or adept at without us knowing it.
And that's what we talked about at lunch. I mean, for me, well, we talked about mentorship a lot. And for me, I don't want to say anything because then he's going to get hot head. But Aaron, he, like him over there. I would say that, for me, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Even when I was studying communication, I was like, okay, well, what do I do with this? I'm not sure. And it wasn't until Aaron was like, well, have you ever thought about marketing? And I was like, no. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for him being like, hey, you're really good at this. You should explore that. And so I love that we talked so much about mentorship at TSU because I really think that it's important because you're right. Sometimes you don't know what your skills are, but other people might see that and bring that out of you, which is why internships are important. And, all of that is going to contribute to where your path leads you.
I thought it was fascinating that Sophia mentioned an aptitude test that she took, and that's what
led her to
That's what led her. And she took it 3 times, and every single time it came back architect.
Yes, architect.
Which I thought was really interesting. So that was her path. But that's, as we think about the ways that people get to where they are. And I don't think you should always assume that it's the end either, because maybe what you were meant to do happens when you're 60 or 70 or
Sophia,
12.
Was it Sophia that said, talk about what you want to do around other people? Did you hear that?
Yeah, talk about your dreams.
Talk about your dreams.
I love that.
She said,
I really love that.
You never know who's going to be listening.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, yes.
I thought in my head as she was saying that, I thought that's such a good variation on the universe is always listening.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, but you need to put it out there. It needs to come out of you.
Yes.
It needs to come from the depths. I'm kind of like, I wish the universe could read my mind though. But with that, but you never know because the universe may have positioned someone near you, next to you, who is receptive to something you've just said, who can say, oh, you should meet this person, who that takes you onto whatever your next is.
Any other big learning moments, or interviews or interview moments that stick out in your head?
I think in aggregate, the willingness of people to talk about themselves, which sounds really inanely obvious because most human beings like to talk about themselves. But I thought that in each episode, whether it made it on the podcast or not, that people were really revelatory. The conversations got really personal. And even though every single one of them, I didn't do any of them, I wasn't in the same room with the person. We did these all via Zoom. There were a couple of times where I got up and looked. So I was in my home office, I think 90% of the time. Like I halfway expected Mike McCassell to be sitting on my sofa or at my kitchen table with me.
You would wish.
Yeah, I wish. Yes. Oh, maybe I just projected something into the universe. But yes, I do wish Mike McCassell had been sitting in my home.
Mike McCassell, if you're listening, she wants to have you on the
hey,
show
Mike
in
McCassell.
person.
But third grade teacher, Mr.
Juan Edgar Gonzalez.
Yes. Yeah. So he was fascinating in a lot of ways. I think I'm just fascinated by teachers, but he had so much warmth. And it was always interesting for me after doing the interviews and then having kind of our, kind of sidebar conversation, and then to go back and listen after the wonderful editing and the production, that note of authenticity and just good human beings. I'm a bit of a cynic, a lot of a cynic, and every single person we talked to was deep down inside this kind of amazing, heart-filled, soulful human being who love what they do. And that felt really good to talk to people who are passionate about the work that they do and what that work means to others. I think what we do, I'll go back to that, original premise. It's personal. How we are connected to what we do and what it means to us. So kind of going back to that purpose, that meaningfulness, that's really personal. And people don't always have the answer either. I mean, I think we're catching some folks mid-flight too, that they're figuring out
Yeah.
why or how they're connected to what they do. And so that could be an interesting exploration.
But I think also I would love to explore getting guests that maybe their purpose or their skill isn't their job. So like I would love for us to interview someone that their job is this, but like what they do on the weekends, maybe it's their hobby or something else that they've created. But it's like, but that's not my full-time job. My full-time job is I'm this, but this is what I love to do. And this is how I inspire other people. And I would love to explore that and not.
And I
just,
still want to ask the why question.
Yes.
Why? Why do you do that? Why do you love that? Do you do that because as a child, I'm going back to your grocery list. Did your mom make grocery lists?
Grocery list.
Like that's the first list that I could think of.
My mom did make grocery lists, and she always told me to make grocery lists before you go to the grocery because you just buy stuff because you're hungry, and you just buy random stuff.
So that could have some.
like
Even
that
though
part.
I still do that. And actually, this is fun. She actually mentioned that the other day. I was like, oh, I'm at the grocery store. And she's like, don't you have like a list? And I was like, no. And she's like, how do you know what to buy? I was like, you're right. I don't know why I don't have a list.
So
But
here's my
never
enduring
gonna-
question about grocery lists, because my mother was a list maker also, but like I still have, after she passed away and we're cleaning out the house, stacks of grocery lists. And I look at her lists, and in my head, I'm thinking, dude, why didn't you just keep one list? Because you're always buying the same
thing.
stuff.
Yeah.
I'm like, why? But like, she actually enjoyed it was the process.
Yeah.
She enjoyed the process of thinking about what she needed, looking at all the shelves and the cupboards, thinking about what she needed, making the list. It was always on the back of an envelope. But thinking about what she needed and then going and getting those specific things. And she also, are you a check mark or put a line through?
Check mark. I like to make the little box.
See?
And then I like to put the check mark in there.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
it's like a handwritten. If
Yeah.
it's on my notes,
You
I
make
put.
a box.
Yeah, I make a box always. Like someone taught me when I was in high school, like how to take notes, and I remember I don't know who it was, but I remember her examples were always boxes, and I've always done that.
So see, that's where does all that stuff live in our? What part of our brains does a lot of the stuff that we observe as kids, like? My mother never taught me how to make a list. I just observed her making a list. And I also observed how much enjoyment she got out of it. Like making lists made her happy. And so watching her with her grocery lists, like watching your mom, in her happiness is a really, it's a special moment. I never thought about it like that. And so all of this stuff that we accumulate as children or any point of our lives, where does that live? And then what triggers it or releases it, and then how do we use it? And so, in that conversation with Tracy about reading a room, and she talked about evaluating a room before walking into it, and she talked about that very specifically. As a Black woman, we need to have this additional sense of understanding safety and places where we are safe. And so she applied that very specifically to who she was. Is that a learned skill? Is that an acquired skill? Did her parents teach her that? Is that something that she assumed through a lifetime? So I'm still in that original premise for the skill set. I am still super curious about how these things evince themselves in our personalities. Do we learn them? Do we pick them up? Are they out of necessity? I think the answer is yes to, they're all of those things. But what makes you make those lists? What makes you the nicest human being on the face of the earth, Doug? What's that all about? Because that's a skill set.
Let's uncover that.
Yeah, let's uncover that.
Let's spend the rest of the episode on that. Yeah. So I want to explore a couple evolutions in the skill set. So right now we're in a skill set studio episode.
Yeah, we're face to
Which is
face
pretty
and not
cool.
on Zoom.
This is the first time ever. That's
Yes,
exciting.
and we've got the vignettes also. So I'm excited. I'm excited for those new means, just because I really believe our audience gets so much out of you in these moments where you're able to just share what's on your mind or these strange thoughts around skill sets and all that. I mean, anything you want to share about the vignettes or ideas for the studio coming up?
So the vignettes I'm excited about. They're kind of these little slices of life, very personal slices of life. It's a moment for some storytelling. The first vignette is about an experience that I had when I was 5 or 6 years old. And it was watching my dad navigate a really difficult situation. And of course, I didn't realize it at the time, but he was very conscious of how he appeared in front of me. And so clearly one of the things I'm fascinated about is, the relationship that we have with our parents, and how in so many ways we pattern, whether we know it or not, we pattern behaviors, or we learn behaviors or attitudes or reactions from our parents. And so I think that'll lend a personal, with the skill set, I don't like just being this phantom voice. I want to make sure I'm a person with that voice. And so I think the vignettes are going to lend a bit for listeners to understand who I am as a human being. The studio pieces, those feel unfiltered to me. Like those are nice bits of randomized conversation that connect to an episode, but also bring in thoughts. Both of you and Adriana bring in your thoughts as well. And so I like that layering moment, and what you help me uncover, because the two of you ask me these great questions, and then it causes me to have to think really fast on my feet. But I like being able to kind of unveil that, reveal that in the course of the conversation, because it's a different take.